more on this story, let's cross to London, where we can speak with Rachel Owens, an analyst and campaigner with transparency watchdog Global Witness. First of all, thank you very much for joining us here on France at 24 this morning. If we could just start with those embarrassing revelations for the British Prime Minister. I mean, it's embarrassing enough, but the scandal on the whole is damaging for the UK on the whole, isn't it, given the number of UK territories involved in offshoring? Just why is Britain so heavily involved in this?
I think that's a really, really good question. And in fact, for us, this story really just lays bare, if you're rich, powerful and politically connected, you're able to hide your assets and your dirty money in the offshore world. And unfortunately, the UK lies at the heart of this because so many, as you mentioned, so many of the UK overseas territories and crown dependencies, such as the British Virgin Islands, the Isle of Man, are the place for this, and the anonymous companies being used by these criminals are based there, and there's absolutely no information about them. It's completely secret. So we're calling for a lot more action from the UK government on this.
Well, do you think the UK has the power to fix this problem? And if it does, why hasn't it done so already?
Yes, definitely. David Cameron, the UK Prime Minister, has actually taken very strong strides in terms of increasing transparency. The UK is implementing a public registry of all of the real owners, so the beneficial owners of companies based in the UK mainland. And now what we're saying is, why is that not good enough for the UK tax havens? Specifically because we know from our investigations, Global Witnesses investigations, that in these offshore areas, there is massive amounts of criminality, tax evasion, even linked to terrorism. And so for us, it's really now time for David Cameron to act.
Now, the laws as they stand, I mean, there is an element to this which many may find morally repugnant, but still a lot of these people in the tax havens aren't actually breaking any laws. Given that there's no law breaking going on for some of the people using these offshore companies, do you think there is the political will now to change any of this, or are people just hoping it'll blow away?
Well, I think that's exactly the point. This is about political will. Our investigations and this massive leak has shown that there is criminal activity and quite the opposite, unfortunately. So while the offshore industry may have been set up for very legitimate reasons, unfortunately, it's being used for the complete opposite now. And in terms of the UK public, ourselves and Christian Aid have just commissioned a poll before this leak came out, and it showed that 77% of the UK public really want David Cameron to act on this. So there's clearly public will. Now we just need political will. And he is actually organising the world's first anti-corruption summit here in London in May, with 40 states coming from all over the world to discuss corruption. And this is a perfect opportunity to have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really create transparency through public registers in the overseas territories.
Well, we may have 40 countries coming to the UK to discuss this. We know the OECD has signed up dozens of countries in their efforts for increased tax transparency. But we seem to be coming back to the story again and again. And it looks like a global effort is needed. But we see this again and again and nothing happens. Do you think this time there is hope for a breakthrough, or are we going to go down the same road again?
Well, I don't think I'd be a campaigner if I didn't believe it in the power of positive change. And I really think, look at what's happened in Iceland. We really need to get the public engaged in this. Tax seems like a boring issue, but it's actually a really, really important issue. It affects us at home in terms of we don't get enough money in our treasury to spend on public services, but it also has a massive impact abroad in developing countries. It is estimated that $1 trillion is lost through developing countries losing money through tax havens. So this is, it leads to criminality and terrorism. So for us, it's really about the public putting enough pressure on their governments to take action on this. And the way that we see a solution is to shine a light and to have a lot more transparency on who really owns these companies.
Rachel Owens, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us here on France 24 this morning. That's Rachel Owens from the transparency watchdog Global Witness. Now, Turkish officials have tentatively scheduled today as a resumption date for the stalled deportations from Greece as part of a much criticised EU deal. Well, a last-minute rush of asylum applications has hampered operations to deport people on Tuesday, with Athens halting the transfer of human cargo after admitting they're not ready to resume. Well, meanwhile, the UN has been voicing concern about 13 individuals who were sent back to Turkey on Monday, while NGOs continue to decry the EU deal as a travesty. Well, as the bloc continues defending the controversial agreement, the EU is also preparing to unveil plans to overhaul its asylum system today. The current Dublin rules place a huge burden on countries like Greece, which receive the refugees who are bound to claim asylum in the first country they arrive in. Well, critics say the current crisis rendered the Dublin Accord obsolete, but the bloc's already deeply divided on how to tackle the crisis, with many states too worried about immigration to show solidarity with those on the front line. Well, earlier I asked our Brussels correspondent Maeve McMahon if anything will realistically change today, given the level of discord in the EU when it comes to this issue.
We'll see a very heartfelt speech come from the European Commissioner for Migration, Dimitri Avramopoulos. He'll be calling for a fairer system. He'll be calling for more solidarity. But as you know, this issue is very sensitive back over in EU capitals, and any changes to the Dublin rules will, of course, need to be signed off by the 28 capitals. They'll also need to go through the European Parliament to make sure that they go down well as well with member states. And we've all seen how that